We'll kick open the doors.
And you're live.
And we're live. That's good. I have to tell this agents. Then starting the appraisal class.
Are these a mix of loan officers and processors and realtors, or?
The audience should be heavy realtors. There's probably a couple of our loan officers that are in here, and maybe some branch managers that have joined us, essentially because they may tap you on the shoulder and do this for their own realtors down the road.
Understood.
Yeah, so I'm just clearing off my Giants screen in here. Good deal. Good deal. All right, so we've got the doors open, which is good. We're a little bit early, which is good. And we'll let everybody get in here. We've got crazy 51 questions, 52 questions. All right, you got enough liquid there, John? Do you have to go get some
I'm
water?
good.
Gonna get some tea to make sure we got. All right, I got water as well. So
I've got my coffee. I got my 4 hours of sleep. I'm good to go.
Yeah, in my not proud Chicago White Sox mug.
Well, I'm a South Sider, born and bred, so
It's rough going for us on the South Side, that's for sure.
especially in Arizona, they're all Cubs fans.
Oh God, yeah, you've got to go out there. That's horrible. Horrible. So, but Fountain Hills is nice, so that's good. That's good. So we'll give everybody a minute or so to get in. We'll get introductions going, and then we'll talk about get introductions going. I want to talk about, actually, we'll do that now, so those that were on time can benefit from this quick little piece of news. Quick little update for you guys. The VA has come out and said that they are now going to allow the buyer, meaning the veteran, to pay the buyer's agent's compensation. That's great news. However, the thing that I found awkward when I read it is that that'll be effective for the VA August 10th. Which means if you're a veteran right now and you're in that situation, you still cannot pay for your buyer's agent's compensation until August 4th. And I don't know why they're starting at it's August 10th, now that I'm thinking of it. And I think that's reflecting when the NAR settlement date is supposed to take effect. The challenge, I think, for the realtors is that many, we're already seeing listings on there now where the buyer's agent's compensation is not going to be paid by the seller. So our veterans are kind of in a weird spot. So again, you guys are hearing from other lenders that says, hey, the VA is going to do this, not until August 10th. So that means that you guys, it's August 10th or August 4th, but either way, I'm pretty sure it's the 10th. But either way, there's no immediate relief for your veterans in that situation until August. So we'll get you guys something in writing. I think it's a mixed bag. It's great that they finally addressed it. We knew they would have to. It's bad that they're kicking it down the road to reflect the date of when the settlement is, when in fact, we're already seeing it now in the marketplace. So for those of you who are on time, wanted to share that quick piece of VA information. In the meantime, I'm really excited and glad I got introduced to John Shattuck. John has actually you've had your own appraisal company for over 30 years. Is that what I saw?
35 years, yeah.
35 years. Not quite as long as I've been in the business. I've been in the business a little longer than that, but that's okay. The shame part is it's taken us that long to meet, but that's good that we have. So John, as you guys know, we do this class every year. I think it's a great class. We get a bunch of questions from you guys. Today, we've got over 50 questions that were submitted ahead of time. We're going to do our best to get through those as quickly as possible. What I like about today's events is that we've got somebody local. In the past, we have went to somebody that was running an appraisal management company, very knowledgeable individual. However, maybe lacking a little bit of local expertise. With John being in the market 35 years here, you guys are going to be able to ask possibly some very specific questions. So that all being said, I don't know, Raza said something about, okay, yeah, all attendees are on mute. If you guys want to communicate and add more questions than we already have, please hit the chat or hit the Q&A. I'll moderate and get those into the questions we already have. We've got great questions. John and I were kind of talking about this a little bit ahead of time, and he said these are the ones that always come up. So with that, John, I probably did a okay job introducing you. You want to elaborate a little bit, and then I'll jump into the Q&A.
Sure, I'll just give the audience a bit of a background. And first of all, apologies for the background. And I'm traveling. I'm actually in New York for a premiere for my friend's movie of a documentary they did. So I'm on the road for the next couple of days. So I'm not sitting at my office. So apologies there. But I've been in the business for 35 years, a little bit more because I started after I got out of the military. My father was a bank president. And so mortgages have been in our blood, in our family's blood for decades and decades. But I started as a loan processor, then an underwriter, then I was a loan officer, and then I went into appraising. So I quickly acclimated to that. And I say that only because it gives me a little bit more point of reference and the way that things function. So started out in a company called Keenan Associates back in the day. They were like the biggest appraisal company in the Chicagoland area. So right away, I started as a review appraiser instead of an actual appraiser. So I was reviewing people before I was actually a full appraiser, which kind of gave me a little more insight. With that said, we worked, and to this day, we work from the Wisconsin border south to Kankakee, west to DeKalb. So the appraisers that work for our company have been with us for 30 years or so. We're a bit of an aging populace, but in that regard, they're well-rounded, they're well-experienced, and they understand that. And I'm sure a lot of the questions that are being posed here kind of focus on the fact that we've lost sight of some of that expertise, local expertise, and an understanding of an evolving market. But so for the last 20 years, I was the collateral risk underwriter as well as running our company, helping a large lender that's no longer with us. But with that said, I would say the mediator that when there was complex properties or appraisals that weren't making sense, I became the mediator to help them make sense of it, to mediate through if we have an educated buyer or an educated seller, to kind of reason with this and then work with the underwriters so that we close loans with the least amount of resistance while still being impartial. So that's what I do. So
Nice.
that's kind of the background here. So
Nice, John. That's awesome, buddy. That's good. That's good. Well, obviously, it appear based on the way you described yourself, you're pretty much an advocate for the lender, and we're an advocate for the buyer and the realtor. So I think we're in a good place in the sense that we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. So with that, we're going to jump into questions. So first question I've got, and I get this question a lot, and I'm sure it might have been repeated here, but Rosanna and Dorina had submitted a couple questions. I'm not sure who this is from exactly, but I'm going to take this a hair out of order. So John, does it help if the listing agent brings comps with updated interiors? So here's the first part of the question. I didn't realize how linked they were. First part of the question is, how do updates in a home impact the appraisal? And if a listing agent's providing comps, if they're providing comparables with updates. Does that help you?
absolutely. In fact, I wish more agents, and I think agents are afraid to provide data like that to appraisers with this misunderstanding that that would be undue influence. I maintain, at least in our company and amongst our appraisers, that more information is the best thing that we can possibly do. So if an agent is preparing a package, whether it's comparable sales or information about a property, and they say, here you go, here's everything you need should you want it, please reference it. We always appreciate that. So I always say that, if there's appraisers that are ignoring that, that's a problem in itself, which will be a question posed along these 49 questions, I'm sure. But with that said, I would say absolutely. And in fact, agents meeting people at properties potentially and providing those packages I think it's critical because, if you get an appraiser that's out of the area, or, for whatever reason, they're being driven by an AMC and they're accepting this assignment and afraid to decline the assignment for fear of not getting work. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where we do rely on coordinated effort and communication. So all that it all has something to play. So obviously, more information, the better.
Perfect. All right. Our next question is, this is a common one from our agents. What if it doesn't appraise? What steps can the agent take to fight that short appraisal?
So, in our office, I'm going to speak in particular to this because I try to stress this when I do kind of symposiums with other appraisers as well. As before that, until that report is completely developed, you have to leave no stone unturned. So if you're running into a struggle on a complex property, or if a value isn't making sense, it behooves the appraiser to reach out to the listing agent or the buyer's agent, to to find out what they utilized. Did we miss something? Our office is such as that before we send an assignment in, we would refer back to them. It doesn't happen that much in the industry, and I say that it happens less often if an agent is present. But with that said, there's some appraisers that believe we can't talk to the agent, and that's untrue. So, in regards to an appraisal that is falling short, we try to mitigate those before that happens and come to an understanding based off of the data. And if the data supports it, the data supports it. If it doesn't, there's appeal processes, obviously, that are in place at lenders, and we try to avoid trying to get to that step. So we try to, run every effort beforehand. But agents, by providing closed sales, is relevant by showing trends on active or pending sales. Pending sales are huge, right? In a changing and evolving market, a pending sale where an agent last week, I mean, it literally, this whole deal teetered on a potential closing that showed a continuation of a trend where they said the market is stable, and we're saying, no, it's still increasing in this particular segment. Well, a closed sale that was pending, or a pending sale that was closing shortly, the agent was able to actually tell us what it sold for, although it's not going to be shown in the MLS yet, other than a listing, and it sold $12,000 over list price. Well, that is supportive information that if the agent can provide that, you can kind of stave off some of those unwanted stale comps that aren't indicative of the sale price.
Yeah, so I mean, and my advice back to agents just in that regard is, if it's short, your buyers definitely are required. We're required by law to provide a copy of that appraisal to that buyer within 72 hours of receipt. So they'll have a copy of it that they can share with you. Certainly, if you want to take a look at it, and you have any issues. On the listing agent side, unfortunately, you need the buyer's permission to release that information over to you. If I have the buyer's permission, I, as a lender, would gladly release that information to the listing agent. But at the end of the day, the process is very simple. If you think there's other comps out there, get them to us. I get those comps to us, and then we get them to the appraisal management company, who then pushes them out to the individual appraiser, which would be John and his group. And then they can evaluate to say, hey, we have these, we didn't have these, or we didn't use these because of this. So, but that's essentially the process. Get us the comparables you think justify the value. It's going to be helpful, though, as you, as a realtor, has a copy of that appraisal, which you'll need the buyer's permission to have us release. All right. And that question, by the way, was asked by Susan Camino and Craig Jackson. All right. Christine Bauer and Kim Wicks have a really good question for you, John, because we get this question all the time. Current appraisal value of bedrooms and bathrooms above grade. And that's just a statement. So we'll talk about above grade in a second. So above grade and below grade is a matter of whether or not these bedrooms and bathrooms are in the basement or a portion of the house that's considered below grade. Raised ranches, I believe, are the most complicated thing we have in the area. We'll talk about that a little bit. But going back to the question, how does the value of the bedroom or bath change if the bedrooms or bath are in the basement or considered below grade?
So that's a good question, and the answer is that it's specific to that particular buyer segment in that neighborhood. So, for instance, if you have a subdivision that's dominated by split levels and or raised ranches, which usually have another additional half bath or full bath in the basement and or a bedroom in the basement. Obviously, it's handed between above square footage. GLA is gross living area, which is above grade. The basements are below grade. It, all appraising is about bracketing. As long as you bracket that sale, meaning that if we have like properties, then the market extrapolation for the contributory value is almost, you see it, it's obvious. Where it becomes less obvious is if you compare it to a ranch that's an 1,800 square foot ranch above grade with, say, an unfinished basement, and then a 1,200 square foot raised ranch that if you were to incorporate the lower level, now you're getting closer to 17 or 1,800 square feet, right? So it would be indicative to have comparable sales that are similar in design by comparison, either from the appraiser or from the realtor in terms of a CMA. So the contributory value of those basements, bedrooms, and baths all depends on that market segment of what that dictates, and that differs. It differs from subdivision to subdivision. I mean, sometimes it's quite obvious that like a 3-bedroom home, versus a 4-bedroom home in today's world. Sometimes, pre-COVID, you didn't need the extra bedroom. Remember, we were worrying about, oh, who cares? We don't need a 4th bedroom. Well, guess what? 3 years ago, suddenly that extra bedroom became important to the market. So it's about making sure that you have comparable properties truly, and then you extrapolate those adjustments. So sometimes they're equal to above grade on basements, sometimes they're not. But again, as long as you have a comparable that you can hang your hat on, where you can then extrapolate those adjustments to the comps that deviate, that's what's critical.
Okay. So I want to break this down and make this a little simpler, just from a standpoint of, when I talked to the person that asked this question earlier in the week, we talked about the fact that, a finished basement or an extra bedroom in, let's say, where the home average price, let's say in Hanover Park or Streamwood, an extra bedroom in the basement is different than an extra bedroom in, let's say, Barrington or something like that, just based on finishes, sizes, different things like that. And like you said, expectations. I think the biggest thing, though, what I hear sometimes from realtors, and I think that the training's gotten much better on this, John, from the boards and everything, is that your bedrooms and bathrooms below grade don't really count as true bedrooms and bathrooms in the room counts.
Well,
And
they're
that
never
impacts
in the
value at
overall
some
room
point.
count. Right.
What's
So
that?
basically, on the appraisal, and I think a lot of people, even in underwriting, fail to realize that in an appraisal process, it's a form created by Fannie or Freddie or FHA, right? And they break it down into segments, and it reads like a book, and it says above grade contains, these amount of rooms and what constitutes rooms. It doesn't mean that they're not included in the overall room count in total, but above grade, they're broken out separately. But and again, the finish of the basement has a lot to do with the contributory value. A lower level basement with a bedroom with drop ceilings that's 7 by 10 versus a traditional bedroom that might be 10 by 12. I'm just giving us
Yeah,
a
sure.
hypothetical.
With drywall
Um,
ceilings and
you
can
know,
lights.
it's all relative to the comps. So they are broken out. Even we do a lot of private appraisals, and if you think we have a dilemma with people trying to understand what happened to the contribution in a lower level, imagine that on the private sector side for estates. It's hard to wrap their brain around, so we don't put it on a lending form. We put it on a form where we can include them together. And
Okay.
then as long as they're comparable to the comp, then they see it that way.
Okay. Regina was our first one. Thank you, Regina, to add some questions into the chat. And I like this question because it's not a bad segue into this conversation. What makes the legal bedroom in a basement of a residential home?
So it's a bit of a trick question. So there's a misnomer, just to be clear. A bedroom does not have to have necessarily a closet. There is
Ooh.
no rule to that. Trust me, I've talked to head people at Fannie, Freddie. It's what the market dictates. So just imagine an older home that they had wardrobes, right? So
Right.
they never had traditional closets, and some of the closets were added after the fact, as long as it's common to the area. But the caveat to that is that a bedroom to be considered a bedroom for Fannie, Freddie, and FHA is the ability to be able to safely leave that room, and there needs to be a window. So that's really the caveat, is that we just had one that there was an addition. Just imagine a ranch with an addition off the back, and there used to be a window that went out to the back, and that was the end of the house. They closed that off. Now they put a tandem room after that around it. Now that room isn't really considered a bedroom, but in the report, you can say that, although there is no secondary access, it's utilized as such, and the market recognizes that. The market, there is no hard rule of what constitutes a bedroom per se. It's the conformity to the market. And
Okay.
I mean,
But
we just had this question with HUD yesterday. It was an argument back and forth with, I was kind of on the backside of kind of responding to somebody, because they said, what do you do under a 2-unit building in Chicago where you have, a bedroom in the basement? If it doesn't have a window, that's a problem. It's because they have to, it's now a health and safety issue. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the market wouldn't accept it not having a window. It's just Fannie, Freddie, and the secondary market would have a hard time if it was now a 1-bedroom home because the second bedroom doesn't have a window.
got
So
it. So interesting. So I think the epiphany here to kind of, and I want to give answers and try not to be vague. And I know, unfortunately, some of this, when I talk about appraising, I always say appraising is definitely more art, because of how an appraiser can look at things. And I can have 3 appraisers go into the same house and get 3 different values. So there's definitely a little bit of artistic. You guys have guidelines you follow, but at the same time, there's always a little bit of interpretation in there. But to be clear, the couple things that I'm taking, and let's make sure that you're okay with that. And then there's a couple follow-ups that hit the chat on this. To be clear, to be a legal bedroom in Fannie Freddie FHA's eyes, we just need a window. We don't need a closet, and
yep,
obviously,
right. You need a door and you need a
bed,
window. You
door
need
and
an
a window. Okay.
outside entry
And
is
okay. Yeah, so you have to be so in a basement. If you have an English window that you can't crawl through, not a bedroom.
yeah,
If
it's
you got the window well, and you can go out
you
through the
just
window
call it
well and
another
go up.
room, and you might have the same comps that have the same thing, and it just
Yeah.
becomes a legal issue, a permissible issue under zoning.
Got it. All right, I love that. So Kim Strom wanted to follow up and just state, so we are saying that below grade rooms are not part of the overall room count,
In
correct?
the room count, yes. In the overall room count in the gross living area on a grid. So yes. So if you look at an appraisal and it says the house contains 8 rooms, 4 bedrooms, and 2 baths. Those are all above grade. And then the basement is separated and included only in the grid is where it's shown and broken out separately.
Perfect. Okay, good. I think we covered that as well. I'm going to get back to one of Regina's questions too, because it varies off of this. I think the last point we'll cover on these rooms on this, Tarakovich just asked, is an egress window is required, which is pretty much we
Correct.
established. Perfect. Okay, good. So that takes care of that. So Regina asked, we're going to switch things up here. She had asked, would a cracked floor in a garage be an issue for an FHA appraisal inspection?
Only if it's a hazard. So I get pictures, probably a half a dozen of garage photos a week from different lenders saying, hey, we're taking this loan. They just had the home inspection. Do you think this would potentially pose a problem for an appraiser? Just a general question. And I'd look at it, and the rule of thumb is as long as it's not a tripping hazard and the garage floor is still functional, it isn't an automatic to have to repair it.
Perfect. I like that. That would have been my best guess too. So good. I'm going to follow up on that. So there's another question that we had that was submitted ahead of time by Richard Grieger. Rich said, what basement floor types would not pass muster with an FHA or VA appraisal?
There is nothing that prohibits in a basement of a floor type. I mean, we've had dirt floors, we've had concrete floors. The level of finish is then and the contributory value of that basement is determined based off of its overall percentage of finish. And it's really that simple. It isn't required. There's none. In fact, there's a big push, and as you know, I have offices in Chicago and in Arizona, everything here is concrete for the most part, polished concrete. So the old hey, you can't have a raw as long as it's a finished material above grade, you're fine. They don't care what it is, as long as it isn't plywood unfinished.
Okay. We have a question that came in from Jose Valdivinos. Jose is actually our resident renovation expert, and it's a great question I think agents are going to have as well. How are you navigating through offers that are above the asking price?
Well, that's interesting. We see a lot of them. It behooves the appraiser to comment and analyze that sale, and that, you know, and if you can determine a reason for it to, so for instance, let's just go to, you know, something listed for 199,000, it's selling for 229. Well, if the answer is the subject appears to have been sold below market due to motivation, there's your answer. The appraiser needs to reconcile values and the list price. As long as the comparable sales support the value, and the trends support the value, the list price and the sale price actually have no bearing, because technically, let's be honest, the appraisers are really supposed to really, I mean, they know what the sale price is, but it's really not to have any real influence on the outcome. And I tell my appraisers all the time, you know, I'll get the calls, hey, I think this one's going to be tough because it was listed for this and it's selling for that. I said, if you call me again before you've developed the report, it'll be your last day working for us. Because until you analyze that market, are there cases where an investor is buying a property and just wants to buy up that area and you can tell that there's no real support for that? Yes, it happens from time to time. But the ordinary sales that are through educated buyers and sellers, even if they're over list, usually don't pose a problem unless they're egregious or obvious, or then they backed into a $20,000 seller concession after the fact of a contract that's written. That's, you know, where it becomes problematic. But addressing those is bracketing those. Same difference. So you do not have to find comps that sold over list. You have to find comps that support that value regardless of the list price.
Okay. All right, good. Good. Let's see here. I have we asked Jennifer's question, or she asked if the agents should meet the appraiser. That was yes. But she actually had another question, Jennifer Brooks did, which is what's the best practices to prepare a seller for the appraisal? Like
I
what
love
can a
that
listing
question.
agent
Out
do?
of the 49 questions, it's the best one. And this is why. We've done over 70,000 appraisals at Advanced Appraising over the years. And I can tell you that from time to time, we'll walk into properties, and I know the agents feel our pain. The house isn't, because they have a contract, the house went from ready to show to you know, to to not ready to show. And so we would just ask that whatever they do, we understand they're moving and doing certain things, but don't start other projects. Less is more, right? So once we see things, we have a duty to disclose. So we try to make sure that they keep things tidy. And look, we're having to take photos of everything nowadays, right? And then we're having to prove what our photos actually depict. And then we get questions about the photos. So if it's something adverse in a picture, it's going to show up on the appraisal. It's going to trigger the underwriter. It's going to trigger the appraisal reviewer and the end investor. So I would just,
So the,
if
the
they can have it presented properly, and that's why I think it's important at times to have the agents go, because sometimes they'll get there ahead of time and kind of get things in order. Not that that really has a terrible bearing on it too much, but let's face it, if it presents well, the odds of it having too many hiccups are going to be mitigated. So,
okay.
you know,
I've got
animals too,
so the short version of that is tell your seller to treat the appraisal like a buyer was coming through. So
Exactly.
do just like it's just another buyer coming through. I think that's the best advice we can get there. So Kim Wicks asks if the walls were only painted over concrete in the basement, is the basement considered finished?
It's a percentage of finish. So I mean, so trends and styles change over periods of times, right? So when you have a traditional basement that if you were to built in a home built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or even 80s, the height of that basement might not be that deep. So if they added a drop ceiling, it gets much lower, right? So a trend has been to paint that whole thing, kind of like an industrial look. That's still a level of finish. And if it's market accepted and that's the norm, that's okay. The same way that, if you're painting walls in a basement and it's still a level of finish. And let's face it, it's an older home that's been drywalled over in a basement. In my opinion, you have more risks of not knowing what's happening behind that drywall if you had a foundation problem. So, hey, you paint the walls. It's all about functionality. If it functions as a finish, it's contributory as a finish.
Okay, good. I have a follow-up question on that, and it's kind of a nice little segue. Jessica Connolly asked, what are the room height requirements on a lower level? And by the way, I also think this can apply to a dormer, but let's start with the basement. Is there a minimum height
Well,
for the basement?
so a standard went into effect a couple years ago. I'm kind of dating myself because I kind of lose track of time, but we always did. There's a thing called the ANSI standards, and it's a standard that I think every realtor needs to look at. ANSI, right? Look at that. That's the minimum height requirements for any levels of living area required that can be included. And whether it's in dormers or in upstairs too, they have it as, at least like 6'5" or 6'6" or 6 foot. It all depends. But in a basement, look, if you can't, if a 6 foot person can't walk in a basement, it's not gross living area anyways. It's still a basement. It's still finished. So you find it's a fine line between, is that a basement or is it a cellar, right? A cellar you can't get through. You're climbing like this. It has contributory value as an unfinished basement for storage, but there's no real standard for a basement per se, other than its functionality. So if somebody, drywalled out the HVAC system in a basement, I don't know how many basements we walked in, we'd have to duck to get to the other side of the basement, because they brought that threshold down so far. But the minimum standard is if a normal person can walk without hitting their head in a basement, it should be okay, as long as that's common to the area. If all
Okay.
the other homes are 9 foot and yours is now 6, there's going to be some market resistance and a potential adjustment for the same, for functional utility.
Okay. Ray Kennedy asks a great question, and I'm going to add a little color to this, I think, to on this, but Ray Kennedy put in the chat, if we see sellers concession increase in the future, so sellers concession used to pay buyers agents compensation. So if we see them increase in the future, how is that going to affect appraisals? Is it something appraisers are prepared for? Now, what I think he's referring to is if you had certainly you've got a list price of 300, but you showed as 309 to cover a 3% buyer's agency compensation. How is that impacting you when you see that, John?
So we have it all the time. So, and I understand the dynamic that's going to be changing with some of this settlement and such. But so for instance, the rule for Fannie and Freddie is this, is if you order an appraisal at cross country today and it's $200,000 and there's no seller concessions and the appraisal comes in at $200,000, and then a week after the appraisal is done, I'm giving you a couple scenarios.
Sure.
Now there's a 3% seller concession. Oh, they just use $6,000. A $6,000 seller concession comes in. The appraiser, as long as it valued out at the sale price, does not have to change that appraisal whatsoever. Fannie and Freddie say it doesn't matter. Now, upfront, if we know, many times if we have a sale, okay, that let's just say it's 179, it's a purchase price, and we come in at 200, and then they go, hey, we got room for a seller concession. There's nothing wrong with that. They can then go back to the appraiser as long as they're not changing the sale price. But even if they did change the sale price, as long as it's within the window of the appraised value, it's fine. It's answerable, it's documented, and it really doesn't pose a problem. Where it poses a problem, of course, is let's just say it appraised for $200,000, then suddenly, we come down the line and then they're going to add a concession on top of something. We just add the concession on. That's up to you guys how you look at the LTV, right? It doesn't affect that. But in the same regard, there's seller concessions are not automatically taken off the sale price. For instance, if you have 3 comps selling, the subject's $100,000 and 3 are comparables. Comp 1 sells for $100,000. Comp 2 sells for $103,000. Comp 3 sells for $105,000, right? So comps 2 and 3 both have seller concessions that the market appears to say that we need to remove that from as an adjustment on the comp, right? Because comp 1 has no concession, but that isn't automatic. So basically, seller concessions, as we move forward, the market's going to dictate how it absorbs those concessions and how this settlement and how things work out. The market, if the market works, right? All we do is measure that market and then extrapolate how the market reacts. There's no hard-pressed rule of how we're supposed to address that other than analyzing it. And so that's where appraisers get kind of lost, is they think it's automatic. We have to take it off the top. And it may not even be that whole amount. It could be that the market probably absorbs 2.5%. And if somebody's going 5, we'll make a 2.5% adjustment off that comparable. But in general, I think the market will shake itself out. And then the appraisers need to understand how to do that. And that's going to take some work. And it's because I think post-COVID, I think we have less appraisers than we did, before COVID, and some of them need some retraining on that. Yeah. It's not an easy answer, but as long as you measure the market, it's just about understanding that. And that's where it would help the agent to say, hey, look, all the comps in the area are doing 1 to 3% or something on a seller concession. It doesn't mean it comes off the top. That means it's built in, and we leave them alone.
So if it's consistent with what people are seeing in the market, then you're good to go. So that'll be helpful. And to answer Ray's question or elaborate a little bit more, I think, Ray, as you start to see more of those things filter through the MLS, i.e. comparables for John and his appraisers to use, you're going to start seeing more of an acceptance on that. Raza Siddiqui has a question, and I like the fact that we're changing topics with every question, so it's kind of cool. So Raza says, and this has to do with Chicago's downtown. Does the 0.5 mile radius in the past 3 to 6 months work for the densely populated Chicago condos? Value seems to be changing every block, if not every building. I've got some thoughts on that, but I'll let you take a
Yeah,
swing at that,
that's
John.
never been a rule. That's never been a rule or a guideline of any form. I'll give
Wait,
you a
wait, wait. Let's be clear. What hasn't been a rule? The 0.5 or the three
I
to six
don't, I'm
months?
not hearing you at all. What
Uh
just
oh.
happened?
Uh oh. You should be hearing me fine. Tony, am I coming
Oh,
through?
there you go. Now you're
Oh, there we
back.
go. Okay, good. That was a close one. All right, so Tony. So what's not the rule? The 0.5 miles or the 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, there is no rule for distance. There is no rule for time any longer through Fannie or Freddie. There used to be a 1 year rule. You know, you like to stay within time and distance, right? But for instance, if you're in a high rise and you're 350 units in a complex, okay, your value is likely, and this, I'm just using this, carefully, your value is likely determined within that project. So you might have two comps within that project, and then the lender's going to traditionally, and that's not mandated, by the way, we can have all of them in there, because if your market is your building and your building is large enough and you have enough data source to establish their value, there's no reason to leave your complex. Now, with that said, if you're a 2 to 4 unit building, is to say it's a condominium and there's 4 units in the building, and yours is a duplex unit, right? That, that's going to command more value traditionally than, the standalone. You go wherever your market is. You just have to explain it. And they're usually going to start out with lenders like time. Lenders like time and distance, and that's what we do. So what they don't want you to do is avoid an obvious true comparable that's proximate or recent, that they believe that you're steering a value. But so obviously, all appraisals now are underwritten under the premise of DU and some other analytics that spit out potential comparables, and they look to see if the appraiser used them. That's a dangerous thing in an urban area, right? Because you have so much data, they can't differentiate between what's accurate, what's not. So we spend our days answering to why we didn't use particular comparable sales in the eyes of some analytic. But I would just say that if you have good comparables that are reflective of the subject property in that market, your market isn't defined until the market, there's no 0.3 or 6. They like to see current stuff, but that's when you start adding more comps and you kind of bracket it. So we'll get something close, something recent, something similar, and if those adjusted values agree, then you have an appraisal that will score well.
So the for Raza in the question is, if you've got a building that's got plenty of comps, nobody's leaving that building as far as just normal appraising. If you have to go outside of that building into other buildings, I know that, there's various difference. Having rented a condo at one point downtown myself, there's buildings that just have better amenities, maybe better
Sure.
associations, better access to financing. Here's something that I know does impact financing. If you've got a building that's non-warrantable or non-FHA accessible, you don't have a big enough buyer pool, and that always will suppress values. You
Of
want to
course.
have your associations be warrantable, be accessible to all types of financings, because that just continues to drive value. All right, there's a good question here from Ryan Behrens, and it basically says, what are the most common issues raised in FHA appraisals?
Oh, that's an easy one. I mean, it really comes down to so I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of seasoned realtors on here. that remember the days of the chums list and the FHA and our VC sheet, valuation condition sheet. I had to think back of what we called it back in the 80s and 90s. We loved the valuation condition sheet because it literally checked off items. Is the subject built before 1978? Is there peeling paint? How many roof layers there was? That's all went away under the handbook, right? The handbook is very vague. So, but the main issue that comes up with any FHA is a home built prior, and this is where appraisers get screwed up. Peeling paint can exist for a house and still remain fine without being repaired if it was built after 1978. The 1978 rule relates to lead-based paint. So their concern is that the paint that might be peeling could be toxic. And in that regard, it needs to be scraped and painted if it's accessible, and what 2 coats of non-lead-based paint. And most important, cleaning up the paint chips that they just took off, because we go back on finals and we see this nice painted side of a house and we look down and there's 2 pounds of paint chips on the ground for the children and then the dogs in the neighborhood to scourge. But
so peeling paint's the most common?
Peeling paint is the most common. It used to be open safety hazards, and I know that's kind of a loose thing, but it isn't mandatory to have handrails on everything. However, if you walk into a home, an old Chicago bungalow, and you're going down 14 stairs straight without a turn or a landing, and there's no handrail, you can bet the appraiser is going to say that there should be a handrail, because that becomes a safety issue, right? So safety issues, and most importantly, and a lot of people don't do this in lending, but an underwriter has an absolute right to override an appraiser to add or remove conditions relative to repairs on FHA appraisals. Very rarely do they come back because they don't want the liability themselves and they rely on us. But handrails, yes, an open safety issue. Imagine the Georgians that were built years ago, where they have a back door, and 50, 60 years later, they still don't have a back porch and it drops down 5 feet. I'm sure there's realtors in this group that have seen this. It's quite amazing, but you're going to have to either have a landing, a staircase, or something to protect that or cure that safety hazard. But most of the time, that's what we see: peeling paint, broken windows from time to time. Cracked windows now are acceptable as long as there isn't a multitude of them, and as long as they don't pose an open safety. Right? If your front door has got broken glass and you shut the door and you can, harm yourself because of the door, yeah, that one's being fixed. But a cracked pane of glass in a window, and a double hung window on the top section that doesn't open, doesn't necessarily have to be repaired.
Okay. Let's go. Let's see about, Claudia asked, of course, GFIs near water are required by FHA, correct?
So I would always just tell people yes. And this is where appraisers get screwed up on this. Many GFIs, there's 2 different forms of GFIs. There's GFIs that are the ones you can punch, you can reset right by a wet area. And then there's ones that are in your circuit board that run that circuit tree. I always tell realtors and that if they have GFIs that are built into the circuit board, make sure the appraiser on an FHA knows that it is GFI protected and that they're not calling for something that exists that they don't see. But it isn't mandatory on those. It still goes to this open safety. There used to be a distance. There's no longer a distance. It's a judgment call by the appraiser in regards to how far along, how close that outlet is to. You walk into a bathroom and you've got an outlet right over the sink, and the guy's you got a hair dryer plugged in into a non-GFI, and you can bet they're going to call for a GFI. So I would say play it safe, put GFIs within 6 feet of sinks, wet areas.
Right. John, we're gonna see how many more of these we're gonna get through, because
Sure.
I'm not sure we got through 50% of them. So I'm gonna throw out a couple at you here that I kind of like. Greg Jansen said, "Is the value per square foot used as an appraisal method?" Probably not an easy, quick one. I apologize to start with that.
So the appraisers use what's called gross living area adjustments. The price gross living area adjustment is determined from the sale price divided by the square footage, right? That determines that. And that isn't always indicative of how an appraiser adjusts things. An appraiser adjusts things on a scale. That scale ranges, and we usually round in $5 in general. So you won't see an appraiser making adjustments for less than 100 square feet. You'll generally not see appraisers making price gross living area adjustments. So if you got a 1,000 square foot house and a 1,200 square foot house at a $200,000 price point, I can tell you that, just in all the years, that price gross living area adjustment is probably about $35, $40 a square foot. Now you take that same square footage of a house that's $1 million house. That price gross living area adjustment is extrapolated by the market. That might be 50, 75, 100, $200 a square foot. So it's indicative of the comparables, and where it's important on appraisers is to bracket that. If you have a smaller comp, a bigger comp, and something similar, you extrapolate those adjustments, and they're usually rounded to the $5 and then rounded in $5 increments starting at about $15, $20. And that's like in a condo, right? I'm in a lower end one, and then they go up from there. But it's about consistencies. So there's no rule book other than being able to prove or quantify your adjustment as an appraiser. So if a realtor just says, hey, I've got a 5,000 square foot house and I'm just using 3,000 square foot homes and I'm using X, well, you have to have something, a comparable that justified your reasoning for applying that gross living area adjustment that may differ from the appraiser. So we don't see that often because most realtors know that they have to bracket things too, comparing like properties.
John, I got a follow-up question to Raza's question. Noreen asked that we were talking about not having a distance restriction necessarily, or a time restriction. She wanted to know, does that apply in the suburbs, yes or no?
It applies to any area. But in the same regard, I think where they're going with that is that you have suburban, rural, right? And then you have urban. In a rural environment, all rules are out the window, right? I mean, if that underwriter expects us to find a comp within 1 mile in proximity and the next home doesn't exist within 1 mile in proximity, we're not going to find a relevant comp. But one thing about proximity is important. And as a review appraiser myself, where appraisers and realtors and a lot of people make mistakes, it's about bracketing. But I'm also talking about a target. If you're looking at a map and your subject is right here on the map and all your comps are up here, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna be a red flag. So your comps should be kind of encircle your
Around.
stuff. So try not to use all comps in one direction, or lenders have this real issue, which is problematic for me because I think it's a fair lending thing. And it's just the function of how they're doing this is that they'll say, like, we'll use I-80, for instance. You're on 80. Oh my God, you crossed I-80. All your comps are on the south, south of I-80 versus north of I-80. You're in Orland Park. You're splitting. Their heads explode. So what we have to do is we always want to make sure that we're using proximity as a balance so that you're not triggering some analytic to think that we've all went in one direction to
Right.
achieve something and
Right.
we're avoiding something else. So that's important too.
So here's and this is kind of interesting because it probably goes a little bit to this question. So here's a fun one for you. What is the most difficult appraisal you've come by recently? Andrew Burden wants to know.
Earth homes, underground homes. I do a lot of complex. So I'm I enjoy after all these years. I take all the hard ones, right? So we get them to the office, and I split my time between Arizona and
So wait, did you say Earth
Chicago.
Homes, like a
Earth
dirt
homes, yeah,
home? Like
built
what is
right into
that?
the mountain. A roof made out of sod. I mean, we've had some, in the Chicagoland area, the most challenging property, hands down, are geodesic domes.
Yeah.
And I've had mm, the opportunity, we'll just say it like that, you become like there's realtors in this audience too, that I'm sure once you accept that, you become the realtor of choice for all geodesic domes or log
Just what you want.
homes or those
Just
dynamics.
what you
But
want.
how do you measure those? I mean, they're almost impossible to measure, and now with the ANSI standards, what are we left with? 100 square foot of usable space in a home because the geodesic dome is cutting down to the ground. But yeah, we've had a lot of odd ones, but so that comes to question. Once you have an oddball property, and I mean a true white elephant, it behooves the appraiser to communicate with the lender and the realtor that you have a unique property, and how do you want to approach it? Because you have to have more latitude in what you're doing, or else you're going to get a garbage appraisal. You're going to get a lender that's not understanding what they're receiving. So we come across them from time to time, and we see more of them today than we have in decades. And the reason being is supply. We have limited supply. So guess what's surfacing? Those properties that were attempted to be sold for years and nobody ever wanted, now they want because it's a home, right? So, and then you still have to appraise it, still have to make sense with it. And that's where it gets very complicated, whereas sales comparison becomes less credible in the cost approach. The reproduction cost becomes imperative, and that's a whole other topic for another day. But
I've got another good question from Kim Strom. She asks, what is is there, and this is probably our last question, just relative to staying within our hour window here this morning, but do you consider a comp that was paid cash as the same as a comp that was financed?
as long as it's indicative of what the market's yielding. So I mean, if three comps sold for 200,000, one's FHA, one's conventional, and one's cash, and they're all sold for the same amount, there's no adjustment, no adjustment. However, if we see a cash sale selling for, say, less or more, there could be an adjustment either direction, right?
Yeah.
Or there'd be a blend of value on those comps. So that kind of falls into a concession, right? A cash sale could be a lot of things. A cash sale could be at market, could be under market, could be over market, but it's important for the appraiser to analyze the effect of that term of sale, regardless if it was cash, finance, FHA, or when we start getting contract for deeds and some of these alternative financing, which the reality is most appraisers don't know how to handle them. They ignore that comp because they can't quantify or prove what the financing was.
Yeah. All right, John, I thank you very much. We tackled as many of these questions as we can get. I invite you guys to send me some emails if you've got things that we did not specifically address. I will get with John and get you guys some specific answers on this. Also, wanted to share with you a couple things we have upcoming. So we do 2 of these a month. One is our virtual lunch and learn. That's the next one coming up June 25th. We're going to have Ryan Shafkis on. Ryan is a real estate tax appeal attorney. Now he's going to provide a lot of, knowing him provides you guys a lot of benefits. Number one, you'll learn in our class, which will be June 25th at 12 o'clock. That's again our virtual lunch and learn. You'll learn in our class how to read a tax bill, number one. Number two, if you're showing your clients a property and those tax bill just seems very off to all the other properties you're seeing in the neighborhood, Ryan's a great resource to say, hey, Ryan, what's the real taxes on this supposed to be? and he can assist you and your client with regards to appealing taxes. I like Ryan because many tax appeal attorneys here in Chicago are limited to certain counties or certain building types. Ryan does the entire metro area, commercial or residential. Definitely come check that out. For our folks that are in the south suburbs, we are going to have an after hours event June 27th at Sip Wine. So please reach out to us. I believe that's in Tinley Park, Tinley or Orland. So we do have that event coming up. And last but not least, thank you again, John, for coming out here. Thank you again, Tony, for putting all this together. I know she's got some links in here. We appreciate you guys coming out, and we're looking forward to continuing to be an asset for you guys. We'll get you some more information in writing regarding the VA and their addressing of the buyer's agent's compensation. And other than that, guys, make it a great day. Thanks again, John. Enjoy New
Thank you.
York.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.